Hello again, everybody. Welcome to the open mic. I am your host, Rich Ehisen. If you are a regular viewer slash listener, you know this is the program where I sit down on a regular basis and I talk to some really fabulous writers about their work and the publishing industry and the entire business of writing. And I'm really thrilled today to be joined by a very versatile, multi-talented author, Peter Hogenkamp, and I call him that because he does both thrillers and medical fiction, and I'm sure there is a lot more on the way, and so we're going to talk with him about all that. Peter, welcome. Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks, Rich. I really appreciate you having me.
Oh, I'm really happy to have you here. There's a whole backstory which I will spare everybody, but Peter's been very patient with me while I work out all my scheduling. So I really am very excited to have you here because it's been a little while in coming. We always like to start here with what you have going on with your work. So let's talk about your latest work. I know The Vatican Secret came out last year, last April, I believe, which is the second in the Marco Venetti series, which features what I think is a somewhat unusual, unique protagonist, a Jesuit priest. You don't often see thrillers where the protagonist is a Jesuit priest. Why don't you tell me about the series and give me any updates there?
All right, sure. Thanks, Rich. I really appreciate it. Thanks again for having me. So, I tell people this series started way back in 1985 when I was in college at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. Go Crusaders! And I was sitting in a class called Religious Themes in 20th Century Literature. And the course was taught by this guy, Father Michael Boughton, who was a young Jesuit priest at that time. He's still, I still keep in contact with him over the years. He's a wonderfully, kind of brilliant guy, as many of the Jesuits are, but also, had all the other characteristics of all the other Jesuit priests. They were nice guys, they were peaceful guys, very human. And at the same time, I was also a huge James Bond fan at that time and still am. And I got to thinking one day, wouldn't it be cool to kind of write a series, a James Bond-like kind of, thriller series, but instead of having a guy like James Bond who's licensed to kill and, pretty callous about it, how about we get a Jesuit priest in there, a thoughtful, pensive, peace-loving guy? And if I could somehow manage to figure out a way in which a Jesuit priest would be forced into action, I think it would make a kind of a cool series because, when you write, you want to create as much conflict as possible. And the more the conflict, the better. And what more conflict than a Jesuit priest forced to have to kill somebody to save the life of the Pope, to save the life of his former girlfriend. So there's so much internal tension. I just thought the idea was pretty cool. And it kind of simmered away in my brain for a long time. When I graduated from college, I wanted to go to medical school, but my pre-medical advisor didn't think I was ready to go. So off I went to Europe to kind of kill some time and grow up a little bit. And I ended up in Austria. And when I was living in Austria for 3 years, we used to take frequent trips down to Italy, which is just to the south of Austria. And I landed in this place called the Cinque Terre based on, I was on a train one day and, one of my friends was talking to some other guy. He goes, "You got to go to the Cinque Terre." And this is what life was like back those days, before cell phones and stuff. You talk to somebody on a train, they say to go here, and on the way there, you go somewhere else. And so I ended up at the Cinque Terre, which is probably the most beautiful place I've ever been in my whole life.
I will agree.
A lot of time there. I've actually returned there 4 or 5 times. But just to kind of give you an image of the place, it's imagine this beautiful Mediterranean Ocean, and you have these mountains that just get thrust up out of the ocean, straight up. And you're looking there on the shore, and you're looking straight up to see these peaks that go up almost 2,000 meters straight out of the ocean. The little villages are kind of tucked away in the crags in between these peaks. And for most of its existence, the only way to get to these places was by boat. When I was there, they had actually put a train. They'd board a train through the mountain, and so you could actually take a train to these places and get off at each little village. But there was no roads or anything else like that. They've subsequently built some kind of very windy roads in there. But I was so enamored with the place, I said to myself, when I'm older and I have some time to sit down and write, I'm going to write a book that's set in this place because the setting was so beautiful. And I never really, I do a lot of reading. I've never really read a book that had been set there. So I kind of had my character and I had my setting. I just kind of needed a story. And I didn't really kind of develop that story until many, many years later. It was, I think, 2009, I started writing this book. And I was just sitting around thinking, how am I going to get this Jesuit priest involved in this situation? What's going to make him do it? And what makes him do it is the fact that he learns his old girlfriend comes to visit him in the confessional. And this is the first chapter of the book, so it's not really a spoiler. But in this confessional, she tells him that she's inadvertently gotten mixed up in this plot, and that these terrorists who she's bringing into the country on her fishing boat are planning to kill the Pope. But she can't do anything because they're holding her family hostage. And she doesn't know what to do. She turns to her old boyfriend, Marco, and Marco's still in love with her. This is the kind of the event that precipitates him into this life, because he wants to save Elena's life. He wants to save her daughter's life. He wants to save her sister's life. And he's willing to risk everything for that. And I remember this was actually the third book that I had written. I read several books prior to that were kind of basically sitting in a shelf somewhere. And I remember when I was writing it, I felt something writing it that I'd never felt before. I felt, some tension, some electricity. And that's when I knew after writing 2 books, which were sitting in drawers, that I knew I had a book that was going to come alive.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it definitely does. And one of the things I was impressed about, 2 things, because I have been to the Cinque Terre, and I can tell you, I will give you much credit because it was sparking all of these visual memories for me, because it's been 20 years since I was there, but it was the description of it all was so keen with me. I thought you did a fabulous job of that. But the other thing, you really there's a lot of focus, of course, on the machinations in the Vatican, and so. You're a practicing physician. You have been in Rutland, Vermont for a very long time.
Right.
That's a very long way from the Vatican.
So
how did you come to feel comfortable writing in that setting and really, feel like you could write about a setting like the Vatican?
Well, so I'm a practicing Catholic. I tell people that all the time. Some people, people on my have written me on my website and asked me, are you a practicing Catholic? Because I think they're a little unsure. They sense that I know a lot about the Catholic Church, and they kind of want to know my feelings toward it. But I'm a practicing Catholic. I went to Catholic school my whole life, and I have many religious people in my family as well. And I never really entertained being a priest, but I've always had tremendous respect for priests. And I will tell you that in my practice here in Rutland, Vermont, I take care of many, many priests, monks, brothers, nuns, that come from, in some cases, 50 or 75 miles, for me to take care of them. And I kind of do that as a measure of respect for them, kind of thing. So I know a lot about the Catholic Church, from my relationship with all these priests and nuns and brothers. I take care of a monastery of monks on top of a mountain about 50 miles from here. And I have learned more about life than in the 10 years I've taken care of these 20 monks than you can imagine. They're very interesting people. But I've also had several tours of the Vatican. I've been to Rome many times. And I've read, to be honest with you, I read a ton of books about the Vatican. The Vatican is one of those places that kind of inspires people to write about. And there's an entire genre of thrillers, from Vatican thrillers. If you ever look up, just type in Vatican thriller one day to your Google browser, and you'll notice that there's a lot of them. Hopefully mine will be at the top of that, but there are many. So I've learned a lot in books. I read an entire history of the papacy in preparation for this book. And that was one of the most interesting books ever, because there have been a lot of popes in the world, and not all of them have been like Pope John Paul III or Pope Francis. A lot of them have been, kind of despots and, almost thugs.
Right.
So it's very interesting, the history of the Catholic Church, and I find the machinations of the Vatican and the cardinals of the cure. I find it very interesting. I really do.
Well, I will tell you again, having been in that building myself, I mean, whether you are a Catholic or not, when there's something that's just so breathtaking when you are on those grounds. And I thought you really captured, like say, I found myself feeling things that I recall from that time, those moments of like, wow, that wow moment. As an author, when you get a reader to go, wow, that I thought that was really, really great. So I commend you on that. You have written medical fiction as well, and I wanted to ask this because I love this tagline for your first book, which came out, I believe, in 2020. And correct me if I'm wrong on that. A book called The Intern, and the tagline is "Girl meets boy, finds love, and her life is transformed forever, but not in the way anyone expects." I like that. I really like that a lot. Tell me a bit about that book, The Intern, because it's very different from your Marco Venetti series.
Right. It is. So The Intern all started from a boy that I met when I was doing my own internship, which was a long time ago in Syracuse, New York. And at the time when I was an intern, every intern comes to this low point in his or her career, especially during the internship. And, the hours are long, the pay is terrible, the work is oftentimes tedious. We're not doing the exciting things as an intern. We're emptying out, bowel trays and emptying, Foley catheters full of urine. So, you have this kind of low point at some point in time, and some interns just walk away. And I was particularly having a low point. It was the middle of the winter in Syracuse. I had just done pediatrics rotation. I'm in a pediatrics rotation, and I just gotten sick and had to be home for a few days with some gastroenteritis. And, I was really, really questioning whether or not I really wanted to go down this road. And I met this kid on a Saturday morning, and I only spent a day and a half with him because he died a day and a half after I met him. But I realized that this kid was the nicest kid. He was coming in because he had an acute leukemia. It had been treated. They were unsuccessful. He was basically coming to the hospital to die. And I remember at the time when the attending was telling me about the case, I was like, oh, this is just going to be a ton of work. There's going to be no information. I'm not going to learn anything about this. This is just all scut work. I'm still busy. I feel crappy. I had a bad attitude kind of walking into it. And that's really unlike me because, I've always been blessed with a good attitude. But at this point in history, I had a bad attitude. Well, I walked into this room and I met this kid who was bleeding out of his eyes because he didn't have the platelets in his body to actually stop bleeding. So he was crying and there was blood tinged in his tears. And it was, he looked terrible. And, he was 50 pounds at 12 years of age because he'd had all this chemotherapy. And the poor kid, and he was polite and he was optimistic and he was friendly. And I'll never forget that kid. And over the next day and a half, I barely left his side. I was so attached to this kid and I was so impressed by what a wonderful human being he was here on the verge of his death. And he died a day and a half. As I said, I only knew him for a day and a half, but I never forgot him. And I thought to myself that you can really get to know someone or someone can make an impact on your life in very short periods of time. It's not really about quantity of time that we spend with people. It's about the quality of it. And I had a great quality of this. I formed a relationship with this kid. And as I thought, I do a lot of walking and hiking. And as I've been thinking about this kid over my, the years, as I've walked all these trails, and I started to kind of develop a story about this kid. And so I came up with this Maggie Johnson, who's a woman like me in the first year of her residency. And she's unhappy for reasons that are a lot worse than the one I was unhappy during my residency. She's got a father who's very demanding and wants her to do stuff she doesn't want to do. She wants to be a pediatrician. He wants her to be a radiologist. She's always been a pleaser, so she's going down the path of life that her father has chosen for her. And it's given her panic disorder and this kind of unhappiness. So she meets Bobby during a rotation in the hospital. And Bobby in the book is a completely different character than the kid I met. He's very blunt. He's very sarcastic. He's a kid who's also dying, but he's kind of been on death row for a long time. The doctors can't treat him because there's no treatment left for him, but he just isn't dying. And so he's been stuck away in the corner of this charity hospital in Spanish Harlem and just sitting there making friends with the janitors and the house staff and the nurses. And these are the people in his life. So despite the fact that he's 12, he's kind of very adultish in some ways. But one of the things he's learned to be is blunt. As he tells Maggie, he goes, when you've got a little life expectancy as I do, he could die at any moment. He goes, you learn not to beat around the bush. And his kind of bluntness for life is exactly the kind of cure for Maggie that she needs, because he realizes that Maggie's doing all these things that she doesn't want to do. And he doesn't really understand her motives of doing this for other people. He says, why are you doing this for your dad when you're yourself unhappy? And Bobby, in turn, has never been loved. He grew up as an orphan. He was shuffled in and out of orphanages. And then he got sick early and has been in the hospital. And he's literally never left the hospital since he was age 7. So he is kind of bitter. And part of that reason is he's never had a loving relationship with somebody. And then Maggie comes into his life, and these two kind of are great for each other. Maggie loves him, almost like a son kind of thing, and a friend. And that love kind of transforms Bobby's life. It makes his life, which has been filled with only frustration and pain and suffering, and it gives it meaning to his life. And the relationship to her, she kind of comes into her own as well. She's able to stand up to her father. She's able to decide what she wants to do. And there's a whole bunch of misadventures that go on throughout the book. A lot of those misadventures are things that happened to me in an internship. But the whole idea here is that we always talk about medicine, like the effect that the doctor has on the patient. But I'm here to tell you that, after practicing medicine for 25 years, I'm a lot better person for it, because, I've seen patients and they've inspired and influenced me, and I've a better person for it. So I thought that was, there's a number of interesting things I wanted to talk about, but one of them was this idea that, practicing medicine and meeting all these people that are your patients, especially in my case, I've had some of my patients for over 25 years. They affect you. They change you as a person, and usually for the better.
Well, given that, do you see yourself writing more in this genre, whether it's a follow-up to her story, or with this wealth of experiences and relationships that you've had over these decades, to let those be the impetus for maybe a new series or more stories? I mean, do you see yourself writing more in the medical fiction field?
Yeah, I do. I've got I got a notebook I have, and I always jot down ideas and usually cross them out later. But after doing this for months and years now, I've got 5 or so books that have kind of made the cut. They haven't been crossed out. And one of them is to do another book in the same kind of hospital. I want to focus on one of the other characters in the hospital, the chief resident named Yoda. I think she's a tremendously interesting character. I want to write a book from Yoda's perspective. Currently, I'm doing 2 things. I'm actually doing 3 things. I'm starting the 3rd book of the Marco Venetti series. I'm finishing up and doing the final edits on a new series, another thriller series. And the thing that I'm going to work on mostly over the next 3 or 4 months is I'm going to write a young adult book about a bobcat. And I recently, I'm kind of an amateur naturalist. I love to bird watch. I love to walk in the woods and, see animals and things like that. And, just love nature. So I thought I'd kind of combine my love of writing and love of nature. And I was going to write a young adult book about a bobcat who forms kind of a relationship with a young girl struggling through high school. So that's, I've got to kind of got that worked out. You asked me in one of these questions, I guess I'll just skip ahead to it, how I write. And I write by coming up with an idea about a character. And then I come up with a setting, and then I let the plot kind of, I work out that plot as I start writing and continue. I walk every day. Today I walk 6 miles along a beautiful road next to a river in the woods. And I let the kind of the plot fall into my head as I do that. But I like to start off with characters, because I've read a lot of books in my life, as all of us writers have. And I find myself that I care most about the characters. Mm-hmm. I always use the example of Dan Brown. Dan Brown is a great thriller writer. And, he writes these great books. And I love the plot. I learn a lot reading Dan Brown's books. But I've always found his characters a little kind of 2-dimensional or flat. I just never really kind of hooked into his characters. he writes these great stories. The pacing is fantastic. They're so interesting. But, I've kind of gotten away a little bit from Dan Brown because I just have never really kind of attached or hooked up with his characters. I think most readers care most about the characters. So that's what I come up with first.
Well, and yes, that was a question I was going to ask, and thank you for answering, because I really do want to make sure I ask every writer I talk to that question, because I think it's so important, and especially because I talk to a lot of thriller authors. Thrillers have that reputation of the plot dominating, or being more of an issue than the characters. And so when I read books like yours, where the characters are really well developed and they're three-dimensional and you feel something for them, and there's also a good plot. I mean, I have been told by editors, publishers who will say, well, a reader will stick with a story with an okay plot if they really like the characters, but they won't stick with a story no matter how well it's plotted if it's got lousy characters. So to me, that's certainly my preference too. Yeah. So it's great to hear that, because clearly you put some time and effort into that. So that's why I'm always wondering where you start. And clearly with you do start with characters.
The character, yeah.
I hope this doesn't feel like a non sequitur, but you have two of the coolest rejection stories I've heard, because every writer deals with rejection.
Right.
It's the sun coming up in the east, right? If you write, you are going to get rejected. End of conversation. But you have, like I say, you have two really, really cool stories. One of them, which was I believe from the fourth grade. It turned out pretty darn well for you on one level, and then one involving Lin-Manuel Miranda. Please share those with us.
I'll tell you about the story in fourth grade. Mrs. Dawes, who was my fourth grade teacher at St. Mary's in Clinton, and she was a great teacher. And she was very interested in she loved writing and English and history. She was well into the humanities, and she really kind of sparked my interest of writing. And I wrote this story of a canine policeman and his dog. I wrote it from the viewpoint of the dog, which I thought was interesting back then in fourth grade. And Mrs. Dawes really liked it. And anyway, I was going home and I showed my parents. And anyway, so we had a New Yorker at the time. And I looked down, submit stories, and I got the address and I typed up the story and I put it in an envelope and off I sent it to the New Yorker, see if they wanted to publish my short story about the dog. And 2 months later, I got this nice little note, and I wish I still had it, because it would be a lot. It was 47 years ago. It'd be kind of cool to have it, almost like a historic document. But the editor thanked me very much for sending the story, and she wasn't going to publish it, but she thought I was a good writer. And I got a year's subscription to the New Yorker. So I was, in a sense, a kind of a professional author, because I got paid for writing, back then. Yeah. And I remember the way I dealt with it then is the way I've dealt with all the rejection I've had, and there's been a lot. Just like every writer, we get a lot of rejection. I remember thinking it was cool that she had, sent me back a note. That she's taken the time to kind of write a letter and say, hey, this is really good. It's just not going to work for us. And I kind of, I was disappointed she wasn't going to write it, but at that point in time, I really had zero expectations. So that's how I learned to deal with rejection, like saying, listen, this is a good thing. I realize they're not going to do it, but I've written something that I sent out. You've accomplished something. So you want to focus on, as a writer, if there's writers listening to this and you're struggling with rejection, just focus on the positive of it. How many people have gotten rejections from editors and agents? Not a lot, because a lot of people don't write books or write articles and have the courage to send them out. And I do say it's courageous, because when you write something and you really like it, it's kind of a part of you. And then when somebody just passes on it, it hurts a little bit. But I always try to focus on the positive aspect of that. And I was just reading some website today, and this woman it was Twitter. She was talking about, for 315 rejections, she's finally going to be a published author. And you hear stories like that often. I don't think I've been rejected 315 times, but I've certainly been rejected, probably about 100 between, agents, editors, publishing houses, for sure. My favorite rejection is we were talking about The Intern, And my wife and I went to see Hamilton in New York. And Hamilton's one of my very, very favorite musicals. It was one of the greatest nights of my life. I so loved watching Hamilton in Broadway. And I was so impressed with Lin-Manuel Miranda and how he was able to take this thick book. We have the book downstairs. My wife read it. It's basically a biography of Alexander Hamilton. Is it Chekhov that wrote it? Anyway, I can't remember because I actually didn't read it myself, but I kind of browsed through a little bit. But it's this very kind of academic, very long biography of Alexander Hamilton. And he wrote this unbelievably hip-hoppy musical, which was outstanding. And I thought to myself, the level of talent that this man, the imagination, I was just so overwhelmed. And we bought the tape. My wife and I, we oftentimes drive down to Connecticut to see we have 2 kids in Connecticut. And on the way down, we almost always listen to Hamilton. I've heard these songs so many times. And every time I still get something new out of it. I mean, it's a tremendous work. And so I said, if Lin-Manuel Miranda can make a musical out of the biography of Alexander Hamilton, I bet he can make a musical out of The Intern. So I sent him a copy of The Intern and never expected to hear anything back. And I don't know, 2-3 months later, I got a handwritten note, which I now have framed, from Lin-Manuel Miranda, saying that, he really enjoyed it and he was just too busy at this point in time to do it, but he wished me luck. And my wife's like, "Oh, Peter, he didn't write that. That's a staffer that did that." But I Googled Lin-Manuel's his signature, and sure enough, that was his signature.
Oh, that's great.
So instead of being, disappointed about, the rejection, I got rejected by one of the most talented people on the face of the earth. And, I'll keep that framed rejection letter for the rest of my life.
Well, I will tell you, there's many, many skills that go into to being a successful writer of any kind. One we don't talk about enough, which I think you have in spades, is optimism. And I really I admire it because it's so easy, especially doing what I do for a living, where we cover political issues. It's so easy to get very jaded. I really appreciate your your optimism. The other thing I really appreciate, I like to think of myself, I often think of myself as a very busy person. And, then I look at somebody like yourself and I think, I feel like the laziest person alive. My God, with the amount of work that you do as a physician, and then still to get these books out. I marvel at people who have, work at the level at their jobs that people like you do, and can still get their work done as a writer, because it's hard. Writing is hard. It is time consuming. You need situations where your creativity can flow without interruption. I have no idea what that's like anymore. You also have 4 kids. It sounds like a couple of them may be adults now, but still, it's the family obligations are real and they're priority.
I started writing actually. I was sneaking. I started writing just before I turned 40, 17 years ago, and I actually would sneak writing in on Saturday nights when everybody else was gone to bed. The kids were still small. One of my kids wasn't even born yet, and so I knew my wife wasn't going to want me didn't want to hear that I was going to start writing a novel. But so on a Saturday night, I remember I was watching college football one night. I turned off the TV and I took out a college notebook I had left over from my college days, and I started writing this book that had been in my head. And I wrote that thing in that notebook. When I filled up that notebook, I bought another one. And when I finished it, I actually had one of the secretaries at the hospital typing pool. I paid her to type it up for me because I'd written the whole thing in pencil and paper. And I would write it late at night, and I started waking up early in the morning, at least 2 or 3 days a week at 4:30, because I had read that John Grisham did that in his early years. That was the only time that he did that. So that's what I did. And then afterwards, I was writing during my day off, early in the morning or late at night for the first 10 years. But as my kids got older, went off to college, I had less kind of parental responsibilities. Now all my kids are either out of college or all my kids are away. One's left in school and the other 3 are graduated from college. So I have a lot more personal time. And the other thing that happened to me was, as I'm a family doctor and living in a rural town, I used to take care of my patients everywhere they went. And that included my office, the hospital, the nursing home. So when I admitted a patient to the hospital, I used to have to troop in and see them. And after a number of years, I had a reasonable sized practice. I probably had 5 to 10 people in the hospital every day. And so that was a lot of work that I had to do every day. And then I have patients see in the office 3 days a week. So I was really, really busy. 80 to 100 hours a week was not uncommon. But when the hospital, they developed a hospital system. So there are doctors in the hospital who would then take care of my patients once they got admitted. And that really cut my job hours in half. So that happened about 10 years ago. And ever since then, I was really able to start writing a lot more because my hours got basically cut from 80 to maybe closer to 50. So that's 30 extra hours in a week.
So that's what I mean about being optimistic. If a 50-hour work week is considered light and you get it done, I admire that greatly. We're getting close on time, but there's one question I really want to ask you, because I've actually heard you address this before, and I think it's really an important thing. We've mentioned all the books. And I think one of the things that new writers struggle sometimes to understand is how much the business side is going to impact the creative side of their work in every way, including titles even of their books. Your books have had, the Marco Venetti series anyway, have had multiple titles, right? Please tell me a little bit about how that came to be and how you handled that kind of input from the business side of the publishing industry.
Yeah, my first the first book of the Marco Venetti series was called The Vatican Conspiracy, and when I started that in 2009, the book my title was called Absolution, and I love that because absolution is this word we use for people who are forgiven for their sins, and I just kind of love the whole idea of forgiveness. Number one, in a universal sense, I like it. I like it in terms of, I think it's the best part of the Catholic religion. I think we could all use forgiveness. I certainly need it. But I think, the whole book was about, all these issues that are going on with this priest and how important absolution is to him. And so I named the book Absolution. And so when I first sent it out to agents, I had a lot of interest, but some people liked the title. A lot of people didn't. So my first agent actually who signed me for the book, she wanted me to change it to The Jesuit. So we changed it to The Jesuit, which is also, I thought, a good title for the book. And when when the book was shopped to publishers, it was then being shopped as the Jesuit. When I signed with the publisher, and the publisher for these two books is Bookouture, which is an imprint of Hachette, which is the largest publisher in the world. They sprung on me very late in the game that they were going to change the book to The Vatican Conspiracy. And I knew that was part of the, when I signed the contract, there was the small print, they said they could do that. And what I thought, and my editor, who's phenomenal, I have a editor by the name of Ruth Trost, who's one of the most gifted editors I've ever had a chance to work with. And I worked with a number. But I thought to myself, these people know what they're doing in terms of publishing. They really do. They know how to market it. They know how to aim the book towards a certain genre. So I really felt that their reasons were good. And I was really okay with them changing the title. I really was. I thought The Vatican Conspiracy was great. It lent itself into the title of the second book, which is called The Vatican Secret. I'm writing now on book 3. That'll be called The Vatican Something Else, I'm sure.
Right.
And so the way I look at it is, I'm a family doctor, and sometimes I take my patients, I send them to specialists. And the specialist may have a slightly different idea about the treatment of the patient, but I'm a generalist and they're a specialist. So I have to kind of have faith in them that they have the patient's best health interests in mind. And it always works out. They know what they're doing more than I do in their specific specialty. So that's the kind of way I adopted, again, there's other changes, they create the cover, I went through a 6-part edit process with this book. So the book does change. And the first one is called a developmental edit, where basically anything goes, you can really change significant parts of the book. And significant parts of the book did change. But you kind of have to have faith that these people know what they're doing. And in the case of my editors at Bookouture, the faith was certainly well grounded. They knew exactly what they're doing. But there's one more thing I'll mention, and that is I want to continue writing this Vatican series. And Bookouture invests a certain amount of money in you as an author and in a series. And I'm working hard to get to a certain sales level whereby they'll be willing to sign me to 3 and 4. So that's another thing. I really would love to write 3 and 4, but right now, we're still kind of waiting to see how sales work out, and that's one of the reasons I try to do as much promotion as I can. As an author, if your name isn't Tom Clancy or Daniel Sylvia or Dan Brown, you need to get your name out there. If people don't know about your book, you could have the best book in the world and they're not going to read it. So I try to spend some time doing promotion kind of thing. And I find I enjoy it kind of thing. It's you get to talk about the process that I've been doing this now for over 17 years. And so it's something I've, learned a lot about, this whole process of publishing. And I'll put one word in for, people tell me all the time, it's like, I can't understand how you persevered, because I started writing and it was it was close to 14 or 15 years before I got my first signed contract. And people say, I can't believe you didn't give up or just, or just self-publish the book and that kind of thing. And I always respond by saying 3 things. Number one is, I learned so much from the rejections. I encourage every author to try to send stuff out. You learn stuff. I learned so much from the rejections, from the editors, from the agents that give me feedback. I am a far better writer than I was 17 years ago. Number one, because I've done a lot more writing, but number two is I've had all this feedback from all these really learned people, and that's helped me. The other thing is I kind of set out for a goal. I wanted to be a traditionally published author. And, that was my goal. And I said, I'm going to keep writing and keep revising it and persist. I'm going to keep persisting doing this until I make it in. And as you know, writing thrillers is a very crowded market kind of thing. It's not easy to get in. But I think, you keep at it, you hone your craft, and even guys like me can get there.
Well, it is one of the things that I tell people, because people do ask me sometimes, about the whole writing, usually people who are just starting out. And I tell them the same thing all the time. The number one thing is to know what you want. If you are completely committed to being traditionally published in this particular genre or whatever, then do that. And that's great. If you're not, then, if you'd be satisfied with something less than that, maybe even self-publication, that's fine too.
Right.
But you need to know what you want and what will make you happy. And if you will not be happy unless you get to be a traditionally published author with a reputable agent and a reputable publisher and all those things, then it's going to take a lot more work than if you just self-publish it. You have to persist. You have to know that going in, and you have to be willing to do what needs to be done to get to that. Because as you say, particularly in this genre, but so many genres, cozy mysteries or YA, they're all crowded now. They're incredibly crowded. So I think that's really fabulous advice. And again, I really admire your optimism and your persistence, because I think it's one of those things every person who's thinking about writing or even getting into it, they need to understand it's a commodity. The thing you're creating is a piece of artwork, but to the business side, it's a commodity, and they do know what makes it sell. And the relationship you build with them is going to determine how well that commodity goes on, and whether you get to keep producing it for them. As you say, 2 great books may not get you a 3rd one. You really do need to do you can never take your foot off the gas, I guess, is the short version.
Never take the foot off the gas. No, you're right. And one of the other things I think that's helped me is as a physician, I'm used to working with other people. And when you work with editors and agents kind of thing, they like you. If they want a book by a certain date, they really would like that book by a certain date. And if you ask them to do something, you want a synopsis, they would like a synopsis. So I've always been kind of, as a physician, I've always been kind of schooled in that kind of give them what they want, get the work done kind of thing. And that really helps. I was talking to my agent one time, and she was telling me about one of the most talented authors that she had was a great writer, but almost impossible to work with. And things like making deadlines, calling when you're supposed to. Those things matter. They really do.
Matter a lot. They matter a lot. I will tell you. And one last thing, and then I'm going to ask you one last question. As an editor, I get again, as a reporter, I've talked with a lot of young journalists over the years, and the thing I tell them, when you're putting your clips out there, I know when they come to me, I often will look and say, well, okay, so you have 10 clips from 10 different publications. Okay. Or you might have 10 clips and 5 or 3 are from one and 3 are from another. And, I actually look at those much closer. And the reason is this: as an editor, if I hire you once and you make my life more difficult, I will never hire you again.
Right.
But if you meet your deadline, you're easy to work with, all the things that I need, I will hire you over and over. Right. And so when I see where somebody has, even if it's a small regional publication, I don't care. That tells me that you made that editor's life easier.
Right.
And that editor wanted to hire you again. That says volumes about how you work as a professional in this business. So let me ask you one last question here. And I always mean for these to be fun. I hope it's fun. That's the intention. Let's just say I had this magic ability to put you in a room, maybe dinner, a drink, what have you, a long walk, with any one of the following 3 people. Who would you choose and why? And the options I'm going to give you are Dr. Anthony Fauci, Dr. Spock, or Doc Holliday. Those are your 3 choices. Which one of them would you choose to have a good long conversation with?
Well, that's an easy one for me because I love Dr. Fauci. I'm also I'm very proud to say that Dr. Fauci actually went to college at the Holy Cross, where we were both educated on the Hill in Worcester. So I kind of feel a bond with him. I never actually spoken to him, although I have sent him some fan mail. I got his email. I sent him a couple emails just to tell him what a great job he was doing and to keep it up, kind of thing. What amazes me about Dr. Fauci, and the reason I love to have a long conversation with him, this guy's 80 years old. And he is out there working. I bet he works 80 to 100 hours a week. He looks great. He sounds great. There's a lot of people, obviously, who they're critical of his decision making and that kind of thing. But the job that he has done to battle this pandemic, I feel as a physician anyway, who I'm getting firsthand, I'm getting his recommendations and things like that. I think he's done a tremendous job. And here's the thing that I really impressed with. He has handled the criticism so well. I mean, this guy's had death threats, but yet he keeps going because he really believes in what he's doing. He wants to accomplish this. And I'm just amazed at this guy that he just, at 80 years old, when he just didn't say, all right, I'm done with this. I'm going to walk away and, I'm going to go to a golf course in Florida and play golf for the rest of my years. He never, there was no give back in him. There was no quit. And I'm just impressed by, we were talking about persistence. Here's a guy who has really persisted, and he's weathered a lot of storms. So I would sit down and love to talk to Dr. Anthony Fauci. I'd also love to ask him about some of the other pandemics that we've almost had, in his tenure. I was going to write a couple of years ago, I was going to write a kind of a book about a pandemic, like a Robin Cook type, outbreak type book, because it's something I'm interested in. And as a physician, I know a lot about infectious disease. I would be interested in talking to Tony Fauci about, what were the near misses? I think they'd be tremendously interesting.
Absolutely. Well, Peter, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. I wish you all the success in the world with all the new books that are being planned. I'm sure they're going to be successful because if we've learned anything from this conversation is that you are the type of person who will make sure they are successful. And I admire that quite a bit. I appreciate your patience too, and waiting for us to get this scheduled. As you could tell, for us Zoom people at home, that my critter crew is beginning to tell me it's time to wrap this up. So
yeah.
I'm gonna let that go for everyone who deals with life in 2022 in this way. Peter, thank you again. I really greatly appreciate it. All the success in the world to you.
Rich, thanks again. Really appreciate it.
All right, take care.